And this is the yearly forecast for 2019 as a special freebie for AskTheAnswer.com, the UK's leading website for tarot readers, psychics, mystics and channelers. The people who run this website and in their infinite wisdom have asked me to provide a forecast for the whole year. So I'm going to spend about 15 to 20 minutes looking at the big picture first of all, and then breaking the year down into bite-sized chunks. So there's a number of big aspects happening in 2019. So let's have a look at some of these individual aspects. Firstly, there's Neptune in Pisces being squared by Jupiter and Saturn, and at the squared by Jupiter and Sagittarius, and at the same time being sextiled by Saturn in Capricorn. This is likely to have two major effects or influences into and onto the outside world in two separate areas. The two areas that I'm looking at with Neptune in Pisces, obviously we're looking at something to do with the compassion and the flood of compassion, which I take to be the ongoing and growing refugee crises in the world. Refugees are coming from many different countries fearing persecution, religious persecution. They're not of any religion, any one religion. They come from many, many different areas of the world. With Jupiter squaring Neptune, there's going to be continued outrage at all of these refugees coming to our shores, wherever our shores are, no matter what country they are, whether it be Australia, Europe, Britain, America. And the xenophobia, remember we're all refugees, we're all immigrants at some stage in our ancestry. The xenophobia will continue and become accelerated and expanded. And yet at the same time, Saturn sextiling Neptune will also make a strong desire for an energy of structure, bringing structure into the compassion, trying to find ways to accommodate people. The world is getting more and more heavily populated. And yet Neptune in Pisces also has a lot to say about the environment, particularly the seas. And with Jupiter squaring Neptune, it's pretty obvious that environmental concerns are going to continue to be punted, promoted, advertised as becoming ever more extreme. We can expect more volcanoes, more earthquakes, more tsunamis, more plastic in the oceans. The publicity surrounding all of these things is only going to grow and expand. And yet at the same time, with Saturn in Capricorn sextiling Neptune, the way we accept, work and deal with these things is likely to continue to grow and expand as well. Jupiter in Sagittarius for, well, almost the whole of the year through to November. It is making us question a lot of our own personal beliefs and philosophies, our attitudes towards religion, dogma, theology. And I suggest that the more we get into 2019, so we're going to see conventional and regular church attendances as falling yet again, whilst at the same time issues concerning fundamentalism will rise. As the number of conventional religion attendees goes down, so fundamentalists rise. And the fewer fundamentalists there are, the more dogmatic and fanatical they become. And then we come to the really big two influences. Firstly, Saturn in Capricorn getting closer and closer to Pluto in the sky. Now, the actual Saturn-Pluto conjunction doesn't happen until 2020, and astrologers for the last 5 or 6 years have been talking about this. And this is going to lead to a global restructuring and reorganizing of things such as governments, currencies, borders, etc., etc. So it's a fairly safe bet to say that the ongoing breakdown of political communications between different power blocks is set to continue. Brexit in Britain, it does seem as if something's going to happen, whether it be a second referendum or actually a break away from Europe, because in some shape or form Britain is going to break away from Europe. Even if there's a second referendum and Britain votes to stay, its previously held position will be vastly deteriorated. So Britain's going to break away from Europe in some shape or form. America seems like it's fragmenting at the seams. Australia is becoming very dichotomized, and there perhaps the gender imbalance in politics is more obvious in any first world country. So it seems as if with Saturn conjunct Pluto, the extremes of behaviour in terms of the old structured boundaries, the old conditioning of government versus the new that's trying desperately to break through, the clash between the old and the new is becoming more and more accentuated. And as a result, I do expect that this year we're going to see more and more wildness of extremes in political and governmental decisions and actions. Once we're into 2020, the breakthrough will happen one way or another. I suggest that in 2020 we are going to see the true emergence of something new, some new form of government, some new form of boundaries, and particularly some new form of currency in a way that is going to shape the system and then influence the future for the very, very long term, at least the rest of my life. And then there's the last big influence. Uranus moving properly into Taurus. Uranus has flirted with Taurus from May 2018 through to about October, November 2018. And now it's at the start of the year, it's retrograded back into early Aries. But Uranus moves back into Taurus at the start of March, and then it remains there for the next 6.5 to 7 years. And this is going to change a lot of things around the way we value things. Taurus is the sign most commonly associated with assets, values, possessions, resources, money, materials. Uranus is the change bringer, and Uranus moving into Taurus is going to change our attitude towards possessions. Hopefully the world is going to become less and less materialistic and more concerned with true value, such as knowledge, for example. Knowledge, information, as well as words like dignity, compassion, authenticity and integrity. Now perhaps that's just my pipe dream, but certainly I expect the world financial markets and global currencies to go through a kind of cathartic upturn in terms of revelation. There's going to be some type of breakthrough in this, and old systems of financial regulation are so corrupt, so ineffective and ineffectual that there's going to be some type of breakdown, almost inevitably. And if it doesn't happen in 2019, it will happen in 2020. When you add to this the effect of the eclipses that are coming up in 2019, now, there's 5 eclipses in 2019. The last of them is on the 26th of December 2019. It's only an annual eclipse, takes place at 4 degrees Capricorn, isn't really that significant. Neither is the first eclipse of 2019, the one taking place on the 6th of January. It is a partial eclipse of the sun at 15.5 degrees of Capricorn, relatively close to Saturn, 4 degrees away, further amplifying and accentuating what I've already said about the need for restructuring of borders, boundaries and governments, but this is going to be a repetitive theme through 2019. More significantly, the partial eclipse of the full moon on the 16th of July at 24 degrees of Capricorn, whilst not impacting specifically on any specific planet, it does suggest that this is a situation where, with yet another eclipse in Capricorn, further demonstration of vulnerability of borders. It's going to become more and more obvious. And this brings me to the 2 big eclipses of 2019. On the 2nd of July, there is a total eclipse of the sun. It's not that strong. It is total, but it's total to a minimalistic degree. It's only going to be for a few seconds total, at 10.5 degrees of Cancer. Now this is again, it's not going to be impacting on any specific planet in the sky, but this is suggesting that there's some type of mass realization happening at the start of July, whereas we approach the halfway point through 2019, people collectively are going to be either sort of really protesting big time at what they see as the inequality of the world, or even more hopefully, people are going to be coming together and rising up and going, actually, enough now. There's too much corruption, too much pollution. We need someone who's going to stand for us and speak for us, not some quasi-elected representative who's just pocketing the money. The most significant eclipse of 2019 is coming on the 21st of January 2019 at about 5 a.m. in the morning UK time. It is a total eclipse of the full moon at 0 degrees of Leo, and this is particularly significant. It's going to square Uranus, and it's at 0 degrees of Leo. Now, this is likely to impact on the horoscopes of Britain and the British royal family. Many of you with long memories will remember that over 2018 I was predicting big changes in the royal family and possibly quite a bit of drama. This was primarily due to the position of a number of royal members of the family having a very prominent planets in their charts at 0 degrees of Scorpio and 0 degrees of Taurus. With this total eclipse of the moon at 0 degrees of Leo, followed shortly after by Mars conjuncting Uranus at 29 degrees of Aries within half a degree of 0 degrees of Taurus, it does suggest to me that there's going to be some rather dramatic, large, fundamental shifts in the British royal family and the knock-on effects to many other countries in the world in the early part of the new year. This could happen as early as the third week of January. The middle of February is definitely a favourite, and I would expect this to be clearly demonstrated by the end of March at the latest. Now, in terms of the month by month, it's very clear to me, looking at the schematics for the coming 12 months, of how 90%, 85% of the challenges of 2019 are going to be over by the end of July. And that the first 7 months of the year are much more challenging than the second 5 months. That is not to say that everything's going to be resolved and sorted out and happy families and all that. It is to say that the die will be cast and that much of the second half of 2019 will be spent either building on what's established in the first half of 2019 or be spent reacting to the changes that happen in the first half of 2019. It is clear to me that by the time we're into the end of July, that we're then going to be able to reasonably predict futures for the rest of the year with a degree of confidence. But let's get to the end of July first. At the start of during January, yes, we have this eclipse, partial eclipse of the sun on the 6th and a total eclipse of the moon on the 21st. We also have the start of Jupiter squaring Neptune and Saturn sextiling Neptune during January, so we can expect political, environmental and refugee situations to become ever more exaggerated and overemphasized during January, and I do believe that January is one of the two most difficult months of the year, especially at the end of January as Mars begins to conjunct Uranus, and this gets stronger and stronger as we get into February. And particularly as Mars conjuncts Uranus around the 13th, 14th, 15th of February, I do anticipate some pretty big, I'm loath to use the word explosions, but I am going to say explosions. And I don't mean man-made. I do expect one or two fundamental changes in terms of the ruling elite of the world at this time. I also anticipate some pretty damn big geophysical occurrences to happen during the middle 5-6 days of February, the most volatile time of the year for this. For those of you with memories, go back to the middle of November 2018 when Mercury stood still, conjunct or squaring Neptune for 10 days in the middle 10 days of November, and remind yourself how confusing that time was for a lot of people. The same energy is coming in March as Mercury goes retrograde in the middle of Pisces, in the second half of Pisces. And when Mercury stands still and stops going retrograde at the end of March, it is going to be conjuncting Neptune by within a degree for 10 days or so. So the last 10 days of March are likely to be particularly messy, confusing and vague for a lot of people, especially those people born in the middle of Pisces, Virgo, Sagittarius and Gemini. But also in the world we can expect further confusing communications around the environment, refugee situations and a great degree of political uncertainty. Again, particularly in the UK and the US of A. As we move into April, so many planets are starting to go retrograde. Mercury will have just finished its retrograde process, but Jupiter goes retrograde, Saturn and Pluto go retrograde during April, and we start to get perspective on what's happened in the first 3 months of the year, but that doesn't slow down the pace of change. There is a new moon on the 19th of April at 29 degrees of Aries, conjunct Uranus by less than 1 or 2 degrees. So it seems pretty clear to me that by the time we're into the middle of April, much of what I call the hardcore surgery of 2019 is going to be over. May itself is relatively quiet. It's spent, I think, sort of recovering from the craziness of the first 3 or 4 months of the year. June, well, you got Jupiter and Saturn both hitting Neptune again, this time retrograde. But you've also got Mars in the sky in Cancer, opposite Saturn and Pluto. So there's going to be some hard choices and decisions taken, and there may be 1 or 2 particular times of what I call hard actions. And by hard actions, I mean, I could mean militant actions. If there's any time where I do expect any type of major world trauma, it would be when Mars in the sky is opposite Saturn and or Pluto, and this is over the middle 10 days of June, in the run-up to the summer solstice in the Northern Hemisphere. As we get into July, there's the 2 eclipses. There's the new moon eclipse on the 2nd of July, and that's a total eclipse of the sun. And then there's the full moon eclipse on the 16th of July, which is it's a partial eclipse of the full moon, fairly close, 3 degrees away from Pluto. At the same time in July, or not the same time, but very close to this, Mercury stands still at the start of July and goes retrograde at 4 degrees of Leo, just as Mars is at 4 degrees of Leo, all square Uranus. So this time of perhaps the 1st through to the 13th of July, I consider it the most dangerous time of 2019. I consider it a time of volatility, impatience, frustration, anger and irritation for a large number of people. And I suspect there will be developments at that time which are then going to shock the world into waking up and smelling the roses and thinking we just can't continue like this. Something has to change. And I can't see elected representatives doing it because they all have vested interests. It's going to be more of a mass common perception. And then by the time we're into the end of July, or at least by the time we're into that eclipse of the moon in mid-July, 16th of July onwards, it all calms down. August, quiet. September, yes, Mars in the sky is opposite Neptune, and Jupiter in the sky is square Neptune for the final time. So it wouldn't surprise me if during Neptune issues around a refugee, a flood of refugees, perhaps environmental concerns, come back for one last bite. But it's tame compared to the earlier part of the year. In October, little is happening. In November, Saturn sextiles Neptune for the final time, at the same time as Mars opposes Uranus. So it may be that briefly as Mars opposes Uranus around, say, the 23rd, 24th, 25th of November, just as Saturn sextiles Neptune for the final time. There may be a brief upsurge of controversy, of big change again, but it's going to be relatively brief. By the time we're into December, Jupiter's leaving Sagittarius and moving into Capricorn. Saturn's moving forward in Capricorn. Pluto's moving forward in Capricorn. The Saturn-Pluto conjunction begins in the second week of January 2020. And later that year, later that spring, Jupiter in the sky will conjunct Pluto and Saturn. We're into a very different world indeed in a year's time. 2019 is not going to be an easy year. It's not going to be a year... It seems that since the 1990s we've not had easy times. Whether it be with the onset of fundamentalism and terrorism in the early 2000s, financial crashes in the late 2000s, and then the rise of the right wing in the last 7 or 8 years worldwide, and the rise of xenophobia and nationalism. But this seems to me very similar to the 1930s, except, but this time there's a lot more people and a lot less people willing to be controlled by authoritarian leaders. The internet is now a very levelling tool, and I suggest that some type of consciousness revolution is beginning to assert itself. And I think that by the time we're into January 2020, the world's going to be a very different place than where it is now, hopefully for the better. It may take an element of force to create these changes because humanity is not that good at making willing changes. Ask the Answer will still be here. I'll still be here, I hope. It's going to be an interesting year. 2020 is definitive in that it's going to make fundamental changes into the world. From 2021 onwards, the amount of change over the next decade or two after that is so tame compared to recent years. I'm really looking forward to 2021 onwards. Let's get there. As far as 2019 goes, folks, I think I want to end on a positive note. Saturn's in Capricorn, a sign it really likes being in. Jupiter's in Sagittarius, a sign it really likes being in. Saturn in Capricorn is saying maintain your own dignity. Live within your own boundaries rather than those pushed on you by others. Act in a way that is authentic, that makes you proud of yourself. And Jupiter in Sagittarius says find the humour. There's always going to be fun somewhere if you look for it. So laugh, even through the tears, laugh, because as my tag, of those of you who've emailed me over the last couple of decades now, my tag is always negativity can't exist with its humour. Have a great year, folks. Bye.